Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and just switch us right over to Stina, and I believe she will be sharing her screen.
Yep. How is it going? It looks like everything's going great today. Thanks, Alicia, for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Now that I've stopped my share, I believe that you can. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So Stina is with Proterra, and I'll let you just hop right in as it's
Okay,
really
great. And you can
fun.
see everything okay?
We can,
Okay.
yes. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Hi, everyone. I'm Stina Brock, and I live in Jackson here, and I have been with Proterra since about February this year. My background is in the energy space, and I've lived in Jackson for about 5 years now. My husband grew up here, and we're glad to be back local. And I have been working with batteries, residential and grid scale batteries for the last 10 or 20 years or so, and spent a lot of time on the software side, looking at how we can both provide benefits to people who have batteries of different sizes and other types of renewable generation, and also to the grid. So how can we provide benefits for our whole community? How can we work towards a more sustainable, carbon-free future? So that's been my goal. And I joined Proterra earlier this year because I see that the transportation electrification movement is really accelerating, and I think it can have a huge impact on our ability to have sustainable communities from an energy perspective. So I wanted to tell you a little bit today about Proterra, and then talk about some of the software that I've been working on, and then would love to answer any questions. So for those who don't know, Proterra is a company that was founded, I think about 10 years ago or so, to focus on building out electric transit vehicles. And so that was the vision when Proterra first got started. And since then, they've expanded that to look at how advanced electric vehicle technology can really help to electrify heavy duty fleets. So that's kind of the area that Proterra is really in. Not passenger vehicles, but more on the heavy duty side where you need, really, where you have very tough applications that require large duty cycles and, extreme temperatures and that sort of thing. Proterra has offices located in a couple locations across the country. The headquarters is in the Bay Area, just outside San Francisco. And then they also have manufacturing facilities down in the LA area, and also in South Carolina in Greenville. Right now, we have over 500 employees. We do a lot of manufacturing, so you need a pretty big workforce to be able to manufacture vehicles and that sort of thing. And we have over 1,000 vehicles that are sold across the country and over 18 million service miles on those vehicles. And we have a great set of customers and also employees that come from places like Tesla and BMW and other excellent places to learn how to build vehicles really well. And we also have an excellent set of partners that help us meet the needs of our customers and continue to make progress. So Proterra's vision is really about clean, quiet transportation for all. And we know that in order to move electrification of transportation forward, there are a couple of things that need to go right for that to succeed. So one, of course, is economics. We know that if we want people to choose electric vehicles, those electric vehicles have to have excellent TCO, or total cost of ownership. So when you look at the lifetime of that vehicle, how much does it cost you to own and operate it compared to a traditional like diesel vehicle, for example? It needs to have low operating costs in order to make that true, and it needs to be highly reliable. On the performance side, I think, if you have driven electric vehicles, I think you know that performance is one of the areas where they can really excel. So we see a lot of benefits to electric vehicles from the performance perspective and for drivers. And then on the customer preferences side, we need to be able to provide customers with all the same types of features that they're used to having with traditional vehicles. So the work that we're doing is really trying to move customers from traditional versions of these heavy duty vehicles. And so we are careful to make sure that we can provide a lot of the same preferences that they're used to having with their traditional vehicles in our electric versions. And then the last piece that really helps everything move along a lot faster is the policy and regulation side. So anytime you can value the benefits of electric in terms of reducing carbon, providing benefits locally, such as air quality, and helping to mitigate climate change, then that helps everything go along even faster. And so we do have customers all around the country. And I love to see our little dot on the map in Wyoming. It's super awesome to be able to be a part of this movement and to have these buses locally in town. So I'm very grateful to everyone who made that happen, Alicia and everyone at START and all of the local community members that really worked to put that together. And I think we're definitely one of the transit buses in the coldest parts of the country. So I think there are a couple of vehicles perhaps in Alaska too, but I still think maybe we've got them beat. So there's really some good battery data coming out of the temperature ranges that we see here locally. That's pretty interesting. And I love seeing them when I drive by. And so Proterra started, like I said, about 10 years ago, and they were really focused on how they could build out electric transit vehicles from the ground up. So they spent a lot of time figuring out a very lightweight but strong body, all the different types of materials that you would want to have in this highly efficient vehicle. And then after doing that for a couple of years, we realized that we're really good at making the batteries that you need to power these heavy duty vehicles, and that can withstand the types of, like I said, duty cycles and use that you see in transit. And so recently we've started a new business unit over the last couple of years called Proterra Powered. And that's where we take the batteries that we've built up in our experience in the transit world and put them into other vehicles. And you can see some of those partnerships here. So our goal is to try to help electrify all types of other vehicles that are out there in different segments, usually in the class 3 through 8 segments there, and really help to allow people to take advantage of our batteries. Batteries are one of the hard things for electrifying fleets. And so we know that ours are good and have the data to support it. And so we're helping our partners help to change their fleets to electric as well. And one of the ones that I'm most excited about that I've been working with recently is the electric school bus. So we have a partnership with Thomas Built Buses. That is a division of Daimler. And they are now offering electric school buses that have the Proterra battery inside them and also the electric powertrain. And I was recently in Colorado for an electric vehicle event conference, and they had one of the school buses there. And they were letting people go in and check it out. So we went and checked it out, and it looks just like a school bus, which is what you'd expect. So, you know, it turns out not all that much has to change when you're changing out the battery or putting the battery in and removing some of the other components. But from a student perspective, it's, you know, exactly the same type of experience, but a lot less stinky when it rolls up to pick you up at the bus stop. So that's pretty great. And then we realized as well that if we want customers to be able to use electric vehicles, that they're going to need to find some way to fuel them. And so Proterra also has a group called Proterra Energy, and that's where we provide chargers and other solutions for customers to help them with their fleet electrification. And so this stuff can be pretty tricky if you're thinking about, you know, how you want to change out a fleet of vehicles that you have that are traditional diesel or gas. There's a lot to think about in terms of how you design and plan for that. So what portion of those vehicles should you make electric, for example? And if you're a transit agency, you probably want to do some analysis on the routes that you have and make sure that you choose the right size battery for your electric vehicle to be able to accommodate those routes. So I know that with Start Bus, our folks in our transit division did some testing with Start to kind of look at the different routes, some of those commuter routes that are a lot longer, and make sure that, you know, the battery that was selected for the transit buses would be able to accommodate those different scenarios. So those are some pretty complicated analyses that have to go on. And so we have a whole team that helps people do that. And then that team also looks at the total energy that you're going to need for those buses to charge them up, and helps you figure out how many chargers you'll want, and then helps to work with the local utility to get that all set up. So there's a lot involved there. And so that's why we have a team that's kind of focused on helping make that happen. And this is an example of what some of those chargers look like. The ones that you see here are some of the smaller ones, typically sold for like school buses, for example. And the other thing that we make possible is, anything related to different sizes of the fast charging and turnkey infrastructure, for example. So that's really what Proterra is about. Started off with that Proterra transit bus, but then also looking at how we can help electrify other fleets that are out there to keep everything moving faster from an electrification standpoint. And then Proterra Energy to kind of tie it all together with the other components that you need in order to have an electric fleet. So my focus has been on the software side within Proterra Energy. And I think the software is what really ties it all together. And this is because, when you have a few electric buses that you are bringing into your fleet that you have to manage, it's a little bit different. You have to start plugging them in and making sure they have time to charge, as our INL folks have shared with us earlier about the different ways to do that. And so that's, a little bit different than if you had to fuel up using a traditional fueling infrastructure. But it's kind of okay if you have a couple of vehicles. But it starts to get really complicated when you electrify more and more high percentages of your fleets, because then you want to make sure that you're using all of the chargers that you have in the smartest way possible. And you also want to make sure that you're minimizing your energy costs. So you're not maxing out your electrical interconnection to the utility, and that you're keeping an eye on the rate structure that you have. And I heard in the previous conversation a little bit about some of the demand charges, right, that you can face. So, if you're charging at the wrong times, that can be expensive. So on the software side, one of the products I'm working on trying to pull together for customers is, on the one hand, a tool for helping to monitor and understand the data from our electric fleets, our customers' electric fleets that are out there. And then on the other side, looking at how you can control charging to make sure you're saving energy and avoiding some of those high cost periods while still being sure you can get those vehicles charged as you need to. And then also doing some potentially more interesting things on the energy side, where you could participate in like utility programs, maybe sell some energy back to the grid in the future, that sort of thing. And so from a software perspective, what I've been looking at is really like 3 different categories of capabilities that I believe our transit customers and also our truck and delivery fleets and also school bus customers will need in the future. And as I said, these kind of fall into a couple different categories around data and monitoring, making sure that you understand what's happening with your fleet of vehicles. How are they performing? How efficient are they? Are there any issues that you need to be aware of that you can proactively address? That sort of thing. And then in the middle, you've kind of got the smart charging capabilities that I just mentioned. So you want to be able to save money by charging on non-peak times. And you also maybe want to start to get smart about how you can utilize that charging infrastructure that you have. So instead of having one charger per one bus, you could have one charger that supports 3 buses, perhaps, if you can be smart about when you're charging them, for example. And then at the very top of the triangle, there's some really interesting AI and machine learning based optimizations that you can start looking at when you have a high percentage of electric vehicles in your fleet to predict, how much charging you're going to need based on temperatures or based on, elevation ranges in a particular bus's route. And other things like that, and energy pricing and that sort of thing. So there's some really cool stuff that you can do in the future as that becomes easier to access from a savings perspective. And the reason this matters for our customers is again because from Proterra's perspective, we really want customers to be encouraged to adopt electric vehicles. And so from an economics perspective, it really helps if you can manage your fueling costs so that you have a total cost of ownership for that vehicle that is competitive with traditional vehicles. So if you think about a school bus, you might have a schedule that looks something like this, maybe where it's unmanaged, which would be, you would go out in the morning, drop your kids off at school, you would return to your depot in the middle of the day, you would go on your afternoon route. And then when you get back to the depot, say around 5 o'clock, you might just plug it in and start charging. But unfortunately, that would be peak times for places where you have rates that change and are more expensive during peak times. And so you'd be incurring some pretty high costs during that time. So for a school bus, that could be something like $750 a month more, just because you chose to charge your bus at that non-ideal time, that expensive time of day. Now in the summer, you might end up just having a bunch of idle time because you don't have that same schedule, for example. And so that's time when maybe you could be doing something else with that bus. And that's the example that I have over here on the right, where from a managed perspective, what you might want to do instead is charge at low rates during non-peak times of the day during the school year, and you still have your fully charged bus before you need it in the morning for picking kids up. And then in the summertime, we had a customer in Massachusetts this year that earned, something like $250 a day for participating in this demand response program with the utility there when the bus was sitting available at 5 o'clock at night in the summertime. So, that bus helped to offset stress that was on the grid due to air conditioning and other congestion during the summer times. And so just by having that bus available and plugged in, the customer was able to actually make some money this summer when that bus wasn't being used for driving students. Sorry. And the same thing can be said on the transit side. So this example here is again around unmanaged charging, where you go ahead and you plug all those buses in. So these are different buses on the left side, and their routes are shown across the screen here. So orange is when the bus is in the depot and available to charge and charging. And then green is when the bus is on its routes. And I think blue is like a maintenance period. So you can see that for this particular depot, if they plug all of their buses in on the unmanaged charging side here, when those buses are idle, just available at the depot, you get a really huge spike in power usage during that time. And that can end up costing this customer up to $17 million for the infrastructure needed and the electricity costs there. But if you can be smart about spreading out that charging over throughout the day, looking at when those buses are available, when they need to be fully charged to go out on the routes, you can save, $8 million just on some of the energy costs throughout the year for how those buses will be incurring charges related to their energy usage for charging. So there's a huge amount of opportunity that software can help with for allowing these electric fleets to be successful and cost effective. And this is just an example of that utility demand response program that I mentioned in Massachusetts, where we have those school buses capable of V2G, it's called. And so that's when you send energy from your vehicle's battery to the grid. And I'm spending some time talking to some utilities in a couple of different states about different programs where the utility would be willing to compensate the customers with these school buses for participating in programs to do that, to support the local grid. So there's a lot of interest there. And then the last thing that I'll just say is also on the software side, I've been looking at the different partners that we can work with, because as it turns out, as transportation directors start to get electric vehicles as part of their fleets, they really start to become energy experts and kind of have to become energy experts because of the implications of fueling those vehicles. So once you start thinking about your energy usage, then you may start thinking about all sorts of other things related to energy usage around renewables, whether you can have backup storage perhaps at your site to cover you if there's like a grid outage. Maybe there's ways for you to earn carbon credits or participate in other renewable energy programs. And so there's just a whole bunch of different types of things that we're seeing our customers start to ask about, and that I'm trying to look at how we can partner with experts in these different spaces to make it easier for our customers to find solutions, not just for the electric vehicle, but for the larger ecosystem there. And that's about it for me. I can take any questions. Are you there, Alicia?
Yes, thank you so much. That was so informative. I feel like the presentations from INL kind of built on one another all the way up to kind of some of this technology being deployed with your fleet. Does does anyone have any questions? You can just unmute yourself and hop in here.
I have a question, Alicia.
Go ahead.
This is Neil Ullman with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality in Helena. Great presentation, Stina. Thank you. I was curious, I already knew about the partnership that Proterra has with Thomas school buses, but I'm curious but I was not aware of the one with Freightliner. If an entity were interested in purchasing one of those types of vehicles, whether it was through Thomas or Freightliner, would they need to go to each of those companies, or could they also go to Proterra and ask for a bid and vehicle spec information?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been learning a lot about how these different companies go to market. So for like Thomas Built Bus, for example, the way they sell school buses is through a local dealer network. So you would actually end up purchasing your school bus from a local Thomas dealer in your region. But Proterra obviously has a vested interest in having these vehicles sell and be successful. So we have a sales team that supports all of those different partners. So you could go through Proterra and we would make sure that you could be put in touch with the right local dealer, for example, or you could go directly also to the OEM, like Thomas Built Bus, for example, or Freightliner. But we are happy to coordinate.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything?
I have a question. With your partnership with the utilities, especially for the vehicle to grid, how they were reimbursed monthly, that school district, what sort of programs does the utility need to already have set up to allow for that to be able to happen?
Yeah, so we have seen it's emerging, so it's pretty new space. And so we've seen a couple of different ways that this has worked. In some of the cases, utilities are, there's a couple of different things. So one is that some utilities are actually funding school buses or charging infrastructure in exchange for being able to access energy in the battery during the summer times. So in Virginia, the utility Dominion Energy there actually owns part of the batteries in those school buses. So the schools had to pay for like the bus itself, and then Dominion paid for the battery. And so the agreement was that then Dominion would be able to use the energy in the batteries when it's not being used to transport students. So that one's kind of an unusual situation, but so we're seeing some things like that. And then in other cases, we have utilities that are working with us to do pilots where we get a group of customers, school districts that are in their area, and they set up kind of a 2-year testing period and look at what it means for those school buses to charge and what it looks like when those school buses discharge. And then the last kind of example is in Massachusetts. That school bus joined an existing program that was for any types of commercial or industrial customers that would be willing to reduce energy usage at certain times when called upon, or if they had batteries to discharge their stationary batteries back to the grid. And that's one of the first times a school bus has actually participated in a program like that. So we have some, marketing news and that sort of thing coming out because it's pretty exciting that they were just like any other grid resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is really unique.
Yeah, it's great.
It is.
Well, cool. Alicia, I don't know if you can share contact information. I forgot to include it on the slide, but I'd be certainly happy for anyone to reach out who wanted to know more about what we're doing at Proterra or talk about energy in general or working remotely in Jackson. So any of those things would be great to chat about.
Great. I'm going to ask you one more question since somebody else is. With the new product that you've been working on with the demand or the management, is that something that you, like a fleet or a transit agency that already purchased Proterra vehicles, previous to that software being available? Can they add that into their system, or is that something that is going to be offered in the future?
Yep, nope, that is available for any existing customers, and those would be the first ones that we will offer it to once we get it to the stage where it's ready to be rolled out. Right now, Proterra is connected to Proterra's vehicles and Proterra's chargers for service and maintenance purposes. So we have already those connections in place and have data that is being collected. And so what I'm trying to do is turn that into something that's useful for customers, and take advantage of kind of that infrastructure that we already have in place to make it a tool that customers can use to manage their fleets.
Great.
Stina, this is John Smart from INL. I've always admired Proterra for looking at it, being heavily involved in the infrastructure and energy side in addition to the vehicle side. So props to you there. Just a general question, do you have a position or opinion either from your time at Proterra or previously in your career on the impact that the Department of Energy funding has on all of the work that you're trying to do now? Do you find it beneficial, or is the market to the point where you think things are moving forward on the private sector? Just curious, as I'm not going anywhere with this question. I'm just curious your perspective is.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I think there's a lot of history that has gotten us to this point, not just at Proterra, but in the space in general. You know, battery prices wouldn't be where they were if it weren't for all of the effort put in by federal, agencies and other research institutes to, really make progress from that perspective. So I think that's huge. Also, I have spent a bunch of time working with the different energy labs that are out there, putting time into research for assessments around some of the grid impacts like you were talking about, and, what people need to think about. Like there's great guides out there for, if you want to think about electrifying your fleet, what are some best practices, how to go about that. From the utility perspective, things that, they need to think about for upgrading the grid, all that sort of thing. So I think there's still a tremendous amount of work that is very helpful coming out of DOE and the labs, and I'm definitely grateful for all of that work.
Well, that is good to hear. All right. Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. We have, we cover Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. So there's several Proterra customers in our region, and hopefully more and more electric transit and school buses. It's exciting to learn all of the other applications that Proterra is working in now as well. But thank you so much for your time. This was a great presentation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Our region has done a great job, thanks to you and others. So we're actually it's pretty impressive, some of this work in the Mountain West out here. So thank you.